right. Well, we're about ready for our next talk. So our next speaker is Tony Arceri, who is actually a returning speaker from Oxidize 1K. So we're super excited to have Tony back to talk about embedded cryptography, Rust Crypto, and Veriform. All right, take it away, Tony.
All right. You can hear me, right? Double checking.
Yep, I can hear you. No
Cool.
worries.
All right, great. Yeah, so as James said, this is embedded cryptography in Rust, talking primarily about Rust crypto and a little bit about Veriform. So I am Tony Arceri. I go by Basquiel on Twitter and TRCeri on GitHub. I work for a company called Occlusion. We do a lot of cryptocurrency stuff. My background is primarily in more traditional cryptography, though. We're working on a couple interesting projects at Occlusion that is leveraging all this stuff, some of which we worked together with Veris. We're developing embedded Rust apps for this USB Armory Mark II platform, which is a cool little, relatively inexpensive secure Cortex-A platform. And we're also working on a hardware security module kind of operating system for the USB Armory Mark II based on Arctic, formerly known as Real-Time for the Masses. So that's kind of what we're doing with all this stuff. But I'm going to back up a little bit. So I've been using Rust for about 6 years, and in 2014, I gave this talk at kind of the Rust Bay Area meetup at Mozilla. I talked about how I thought Rust was a very promising language for cryptography at the time, and in particular talked about this idea of, can we just do brand new greenfield cryptography in Rust? Is that safe? And I spent a long time talking about this particular topic. I covered a lot of areas with a particular focus on things like timing side channels and can we generate constant time code in Rust and all of that, all of which at the time seemed very tricky to me. And so I ultimately ended up suggesting at the end of the talk is to take this sort of two-pronged approach. I think it's very common in Rust, right? It's like you wrap existing, mature, well-vetted mainstream libraries to start with. But then I also thought there was a lot of potential to kind of just, start over from scratch, do it all in Rust, and write pure Rust cryptography libraries. So fast forward to 2020, we've kind of seen this two-pronged approach play out. So there are quite a few different libraries that wrap existing, mature, high-quality implementations. Probably most notably, Ring is a fantastic library that also in some cases includes pure Rust implementations of the same algorithms, but mostly focusing on providing a wrapper for these high-quality implementations from libraries like Boring SSL. There's also Sodium Oxide, which is a wrapper for libsodium, which is also a popular library. For anybody who is in the cryptocurrency space, there is a C library from Bitcoin Core called libsec P-256K1. It is probably the best library for this elliptic curve. So that's great. We have all these nice wrappers for high quality existing libraries. There's also many more that aren't necessarily, they're wrappers for what aren't necessarily high quality libraries like OpenSSL or other native TLS stacks. But the other thing, the other side, the other prong to this approach is what we're seeing is a proliferation of libraries that are written in pure Rust, more or less from the ground up. Maybe they started as like a translation of a C library or something, but have definitely really matured. So I will be talking primarily about Rust Crypto, which is kind of a suite of different cryptographic crates. A couple other notable ones I thought I'd just mention. The Dalek libraries. These are elliptic curve libraries for curve 25519. There's also a cool one called Fiat Rust, which is it was originally a project to generate C libraries, C field arithmetic libraries that are formally verified using Coke. And now they have a backend that targets Rust as well. So we've seen a really cool proliferation of these pure Rust cryptography libraries, and that is going to be the focus of my talk tonight. Tonight for me, morning for several of you. So what is Rust Crypto? So you may have heard of this Rust Crypto crate. So this is not what I'm talking about tonight. You might notice this crate was last updated 4 years ago. So it's kind of unmaintained and effectively dead as a project. It's also got its keywords MD5 and SHA-1, which are both cryptographically broken algorithms. So this crate is not what I'm talking about. This was a cool early Rust cryptography effort. The project stalled and it hasn't been worked on. And at this point, it's effectively a time capsule from about 2016. So I'm not talking about Rust-Crypto. So not the one with the dash. Instead, I'm talking about the Rust Crypto GitHub organization kind of informally branded this as Rust Crypto 2.0 sometimes to kind of distinguish it from the old crate. Here is a quick screenshot of the page on GitHub. So a little bit of project information. You can find it on GitHub under github.com/rustcrypto. Bit of history about it. It started in 2016. The leads are Artyom Pavlov, who is a PhD candidate at Skoltech. You might have seen him on the Rust internals message board. He's pretty involved in Rust language development, aside from Rust Crypto. And myself, I'm the other lead of the project. We have roughly a dozen other active contributors, like people who are contributing to the project on an ongoing basis. And we have approximately 100 crates. So it's a very multi-crate sort of project. So you might be using one of our crates already. SHA-2 is very popular, so it's digest. But we have the names of we have the short names of many cryptographic algorithms. So hopefully our crates are pretty easy to find. So the project got started off in 2016 as kind of rethinking Rust Crypto from a single monolithic crate, including one that had a lot of algorithms that were either broken like MD5 or just about to be broken like SHA-1, right? So the idea was how do you unpack Rust Crypto into something where you can just grab only the crates for the algorithms you need. So a quick overview of our goals and architectural principles. So everything we write, we initially write in pure Rust. So there is no algorithm within our org where there is only an assembly implementation. We don't use C. Everything is pure Rust. There also no STID as a baseline, so this was kind of a big holdup for the original Rust-Crypto crate. It was not no STID friendly. So we are every single one of our crates, except for one, I'll talk about it a bit later, works on no STID. And all of them except for two work in a heapless environment and do not need OLEG. So they're basically, of these 100 crates, there are only two that will not work in a heapless no-STID environment. So you also write portable implementations that are effectively designed to run anywhere. So we don't, at a baseline, make any sort of architectural assumptions, except for a few about security I will highlight later. we don't block you from compiling on those platforms, but there are some things you need to be aware of. We do allow optional assembly, so there are a few crates that have an ASM feature that you can turn on. We don't turn these on by default. We make it really easy to get your cryptographic code running anywhere, and then if you want speed, you can turn on these ASM features. We're also very excited about inline assembly being stabilized, and especially its potential on things like Cortex-M. As I mentioned earlier, we are a multi-crate architecture, so we tend to use a one crate per concept model. So that's either we have a crate per trait, or we have traits for different algorithm families, or we have crates per algorithm. And finally, we have a trait-based architecture where every single algorithm and algorithm family has a trait that describes it. And we made kind of architected things in such a way that anybody can implement these. So you don't have to be like locked into our ecosystem to implement our traits and kind of interop and combine with the rest of our algorithms. So if you are looking to kind of do a deep dive on the whole project, we also have the cryptography crate. It's very kindly donated to us recently. So go to docs.rs/cryptography. You will get a Rust doc high-level overview of the whole project. So I'll do a quick tour of like some of the notable parts of the project here. So the main things we author is symmetric encryption using this idea of authenticated encryption with associated data. This is high-level encryption that is designed to detect things like forgeries. It significantly mitigates the things that an attacker can do to you. So if you're trying to do symmetric cryptography, this is basically what you want to use. So this algorithm family, authenticated encryption with associated data, the traits are described in the AEAD crate. And then we have several algorithm crates. Hopefully you've heard of some of these, but AES-GCM is a popular cipher. We also have these cool misuse-resistant synthetic initialization vector mode crates, AES-GCM Civ and AES-Civ. These are really cool for things like key wrapping, or if you need really short messages. And they also use some neat tricks to mitigate against things like nonce reuse and that kind of thing. So I think they're very slick. We also have them popular in the embedded world, CCM mode and AES-CCM. So these are probably the most commonly found AED modes that you will see in embedded. So have the Cha-Cha-20 Poly1305 crate. This is a fantastic one if you don't have access to a cryptographic accelerator and you just want a very fast cipher. We also have its sort of legacy version equivalent, Salsa20 Poly1305, which you will find in libsodium and NACL. And more. So this is just some of them. What's cool is 2 of these have been audited by NCC Group. So they published this report of an audit they did in December 2019. There were no major findings. There were effectively a few minor findings, mostly due to performance, but really they didn't find anything substantive in their audit. So moving on, so we also have block ciphers. Have a little warning sign there because this is kind of hazmat crypto. So if you don't know what you're doing, you probably shouldn't use the block ciphers directly. You should use the AEDs. So the traits for these are described in the block cipher crates, block-cipher. And then the algorithm crates, so we have AES, This will map on to, if you use this, it will use a software implementation that is constant time using a technique called bit slicing on embedded platforms. It also has a special backend for Intel platforms for AES-GCM. Also, as far as legacy block ciphers go, we also have DES. This also implements triple DES and more. So there are plenty of other block ciphers. We don't really, we will take whatever ciphers people kind of want to give us, but these are the ones we recommend. And I wouldn't even recommend DES unless you need legacy interop. So moving along to hashes or digest algorithms, chances are you probably have the digest crates in your project somewhere already. And some of the crates that use it, Blake 2, this is a cool, fast new hash function in software. There's also RIBMD 160, this kind of legacy one, but it's somewhat popular in the cryptocurrency world. And good old SHA-2, providing SHA-256, 384, and 512, and more. There are tons of cryptographic algorithms. Message authentication codes. We have the CryptoMac crate that defines the traits for them. As far as algorithms go, CMAC, cipher-based MAC. You might see this in the embedded space. One of my first interactions with Rust Crypto as a project was implementing a secure embedded secure channel protocol called the Global Platform Secure Channel Protocol 03, which builds on this. Probably a bit more familiar to everyone is HMAC. PMAC is a cool parallelizable cipher-based MAC as well, and more. There's still more MACs. So stream ciphers again. These kind of fall into that hazmat category where if they're misused, it can fail catastrophically. So again, I have a warning sign. So as far as traits, we have the stream-cipher crates. As far as the algorithm crates go, we have counter and AES counter. So counter mode turns a block cipher into a stream cipher. This is used by things like AES-GCM internally. We also have Cha-Cha-20 that the Cha-Cha-20 Poly 1305 crate is based on, as well as Salsa20, which is what the Salsa20 Poly 1305 crate is based on, and more. All right. Finally here, my favorite and possibly the most interesting, we have a fairly recent addition, a bunch of public key cryptography crates. Probably these are some that will be the most interesting to embedded developers. So you have elliptic curve cryptography crates. They have traits defined in the elliptic-curve crates. We have 3 curves implemented right now. We have K256 providing the SEC P-256K1 curve. This is popular in cryptocurrency. The other 3 there are NIST curves. So these are the NIST P curves that are used in things like TLS, Bluetooth, that kind of thing. We have 256.384 implemented. That last one is supposed to be P521. It's a typo when your curve has a weird number in it. But that crate is also effectively like vaporware. It's empty. We just reserved it. So really K256, P256, and P384 are the crates we have available today. We also have the RSA crate. So I said earlier that there's only one that is presently requires STID. This is it. We have a open PR to make it support NIST plus ALEC, and plan. So that PR is ready to merge. We have planned future support to eventually drop the ALEC requirement. And finally here we have digital signatures. So the traits for these are defined in the signature crate. And we have algorithm crates for both ECDSA, the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, as well as ED 25519. So ECDSA, we're in the process of implementing the algorithm. I'll talk more about that later. ED 25519 just defines a set of interoperable signature formats. We're not trying to compete with the DOLG libraries or anything. But notably, the ED 25519 crate is now used by the DOLG library, which is cool. All right, so that is a big intro to the whole project. But this is an embedded conference. So here are a bunch of highlights of why I think these are interesting, why I think Rust crypto is interesting for Rust embedded. So first, as I mentioned earlier, all our crates are CI'd and routinely tested in no-stid environments, including heapless environments. That in and of itself probably isn't that interesting, right? Like that's kind of like table stakes. So when we talk about embedded, what are we talking about? So our tier 1 embedded targets are really going to be ARM Cortex-A and ARM Cortex-M. I feel like this is kind of par for the course for Rust embedded in general, right? When people say Rust embedded, they're usually talking ARM. We want to support other environments. Effectively everything else to us is like tier 3, but it's a little bit tricky. So our code will compile on these targets. We know when we say our implementations are constant time, it's specifically noted we're talking about ARM or we're talking about Intel. When it comes to other processors, it kind of really depends. Constant time is effectively like a a property of a combined hardware and software system, right? So there are plenty of CPUs and microcontrollers out there, for example, that don't have constant time multiplication. Like some CPU designer thought they were really clever. And if you try to multiply it by 0 or 1, they short circuit the ALU or something, right? So they thought they were clever, but that kind of destroys cryptography on that entire platform. So moving on, notably, I think one of the cool things Rust Crypto lets you do is integrate with hardware accelerators. So we're doing this in our Armistice project. And ideally, I think the traits we're developing, you see a lot of talk in like Rust embedded circles about having like a crypto howl or something, right? So I think ideally our traits can function as a crypto howl. So to give you an idea of what these look like and some of how we're trying to optimize for embedded targets, so we have this trait called block cipher. You might have looked at some of our traits before, and we had things like initializers tied into the trait, which made it hard to apply them to things like cryptographic accelerators. So the latest versions of all these traits, which were released a few months ago, completely splits initialization from the core algorithm itself. But you might see in this trait, right, we have this par blocks. We're trying to encode ways to do things like SIMD and that kind of thing. And like that really helps Intel and things like AES-GCM and that kind of thing. It's not necessarily very embedded friendly. So some of the things we started doing is adding sort of separate, more embedded friendly traits. So we think this block cipher mute trait, for example, is a better target for embedded. So you want to talk to a cryptographic accelerator that's like effectively a hardware peripheral, right? Normally a block cipher is just doing a permutation. It doesn't have a state. So we didn't have a mute reference before on that previous block cipher trait. This one adds a mute reference, which we think is very nice for getting to a hardware peripheral. And this is effectively I think our trait that we will focus on using to wrap things like cryptographic accelerators. I think it might be pretty interesting to play with things like parallel pipelining, that kind of thing, with this sort of trait. But we would love feedback on this sort of thing and whether or not our traits are mapping well or aren't mapping well to cryptographic accelerators. If they aren't mapping well, we would like to figure out how to solve that. So giving an example of how a trait like this is kind of useful, here's an example of how you can combine this block cipher trait with the AES-GCM trait. So one interesting thing we've done is make the AES crate a optional dependency of this AES-GCM authenticated encryption crate. So if you want to use a hardware accelerator instead of the software implementation, you can completely shut that AES dependency off. So you're not even pulling in any of that code. And then if you implement this block cipher trait for your cryptographic accelerator using generics, you can instantiate AES-GCM using the hardware accelerator instead of the software implementation. So I think that's pretty cool. So speaking of AES-GCM, we have probably one of the best embedded optimized implementations of this algorithm available today. Specifically targeting 32-bit Cortex-M devices, and specifically even having devices like Cortex-M0 in mind. So I say this, you might be thinking or have heard that AES-GCM performs poorly on embedded platforms, and in general, you'd be right. The funny thing is, what if people have just been implementing it badly all along? So this is kind of funny. So the main way people implement AES-GCM using these sort of like bit slicing techniques, it does actually wind up being very slow, but that doesn't have to be the case. So there's this library called BearSSL made by Tomas Pornin. That's a embedded optimized SSL library. It uses this very clever technique. So the core of this ghash function is effectively a carryless multiplication operation over a finite field. So this is normally done using very complicated techniques to kind of get rid of that carry spelling, right? To kind of get rid of those carries. So what BearSSL does is it takes integers and kind of splits them up into chunks, and then whenever these carries occur, they fall into one of these, he calls them holes, and then they end up getting masked out of the results. So it's surprisingly efficient. So here's a comment in the implementation of this is taken pretty much verbatim from BearSSL, which is what our implementation is inspired by. And it describes this technique a little bit, but effectively it has been optimized for Cortex-M and M0. So just to give you an idea, here is the entire effectively ghash multiplication operation on a single slide. You probably can't read it, but I'm just trying to get the point across that it isn't very much code. So here's the heart of it, is bmul 32. So everything you're seeing, this is the only part with any multiplications. Everything else is just bitwise arithmetic. You can see it's doing 16 multiplications there. And then that is called within this loop that calls it 18 times. So that's like 288 integer multiplications per block, which for ghash actually ends up being pretty good. So I saw this, like, it kind of blew my mind because ghash is just notoriously slow otherwise, right? So I think we have a very nice implementation of Ghash that's intended to be embedded friendly. So one more interesting thing is how to do lightweight symmetric cryptography that we support through the Cha-Cha-20 Poly 1305 crate. So one way you can make this faster, so it's already pretty fast in software, but you can make it even faster by using fewer rounds. You use a reduced round construction. So this sounds a little scary, but there's a pretty interesting paper that came out last year called Too Much Crypto that really analyzed the number of rounds that are being used in various cryptographic constructions, including Cha-Cha-20. So Cha-Cha-20 is a stream cipher. It's specifically this thing called an ARCS cipher, where ARCS is add, rotate, or XOR. It's an improvement over this previous cipher called Salsa20. So these are block diagrams of what's called the quarter round function, which is kind of the heart of the cipher. It takes some input and effectively blends it up until it looks uniformly random. So Salsa20 or Cha-Cha-20 can be combined with this universal hash function called Poly 1305, which acts as a message authentication code and provides you this nice authenticated encryption. So you might be wondering, why 20 rounds, right? Like, where did this number 20 come from? So the answer to that, we gotta go back to 1949, this paper called Communication Theory of Secrecy Systems by Claude Shannon. In this paper, he talks about this notion of diffusion. So diffusion is having this very complicated structure to where statistical analysis of the ciphertext becomes incredibly difficult. So fundamentally, the amount of diffusion that is occurring in each of these ciphers is what controls the number of rounds and how easy it is to attack. So comparing Cha-Cha-20 to Salsa20 really quick. Cha-Cha-20 improved per round diffusion, so it has even better diffusion than Salsa20. It simultaneously improved performance, right? So win-win. So this is really cool. Then notably, Salsa20 already had these reduced round variants. They have these weird names where it's Salsa20/8. It's the 8-round version, and it had a 12-round version too. So in looking at both of these and what the best known attacks are, this was one of the papers that came out that did most of the security analysis around them. It was in 2007, New Features of Latin Dances. And then in 2019, we got this Too Much Crypto paper. You might notice the same guy's name is on both of them, Jean-Philippe Almason. So Jean-Philippe knows what he's talking about because he did the initial attack, some of the best attacks against both of these algorithms. And what they saw, so Salsa20 was broken, quote unquote, as in it was reduced below its promised security margin of 256 bits. The 7-round version of Salsa20 was broken, as well as the 8-round version. So you need at least 9 rounds of Salsa20 to get the full security, promised security level. Cha-Cha-7 was broken, Cha-Cha-8 was not. Future attacks kind of reduce this even further to 235. But kind of point being, Salsa8 is safe, and even with these breakages, which were effectively due to insufficient diffusion, even with these breakages, they're not that broken, right? Like, they're still, like, 2 to the 235 bits is still fine, but Cha-Cha8 still gives you that full 255 bits of security. So the paper concludes, so how many rounds of Cha-Cha do we need? Like I just said, 8 rounds of Cha-Cha should be sufficient for like all attacks that we can foresee right now, right? Based on these principles that go back to 1949. So in conclusion, Cha-Cha-20 is overkill. Probably shouldn't have been standardized with 20 rounds. Like 12 would have been sufficient. It's kind of a mistake, and it's kind of unfortunate that it was standardized with 20 rounds. But 8 rounds still beats the best known attack and gives you a 256-bit security level. So if you want to get more performance out of this, you can get effectively a 2.5x speed up by using one of these reduced round, or using the Cha-Cha 8 reduced round variant. And if you want to take maybe a little bit less potential risk, but not really, you could use Cha-Cha 12 instead. So you offer this Cha-Cha 8 Poly 1305 variant in the Cha-Cha 20 Poly 1305 crate. So if you're looking for a very fast software that doesn't need a cryptographic accelerator, this is the one I'd recommend. So finally, this is the end of the Rust Crypto section. We have elliptic curve cryptography, which I'm very excited about, and I think might be very useful for Rust Embedded. So some quick highlights on what we're doing. So we support the legacy elliptic curves. These are actually I say legacy, but they're the ones you're probably going to care about. They're Weierstrass curves, either the NIST curves or SecP, this cryptocurrency curve. We've implemented the modern formula, so the older formulas had all sorts of security vulnerabilities. If you ever saw DJB's like SafeCurve site, he made fun of them. This is kind of the things DJB was complaining about have been addressed through the use of these modern formulas. So we're optimizing for correctness first, performance second, and providing constant time implementations based on the subtle crate. Perhaps most notably, we're not using any lookup tables. These are usually the killer, I think, for doing elliptic curve cryptography and embedded. So we have, compared to most other implementations, very small code size. So here's a kind of at a glance table of the status of all these things. So right now, the K256 crate is the most mature. It's got a nice 32-bit field arithmetic backend. Just today, I got ECDSA kind of POC'd. P256, we have plans for a 32-bit backend. It's kind of underway. The only available backend is 64-bit. And we have some cool PRs from Nicholas Stadler of Solo Keys to implement P256 ECDSA and kind of like the scalar arithmetic formulas that you need to implement it. P384, we don't have any arithmetic, and P521 is effectively us squatting that crate. So some highlights, closing highlights on elliptic curve cryptography. So we're targeting elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman and ECDSA use cases. You can do ECDH today. It's a little bit tricky. We're going to try to put a friendlier interface on it. We'll hopefully have ECDSA fully shipped by August. And elliptic curve cryptography on embedded is also notoriously tricky, especially things like side channels. So we're already building in things like side channel resistance to things like differential power attacks using techniques like random blinding, which is hiding the scalar multiplication operations behind a random number. We intend to mitigate random number generators through using deterministic ECDSA, this RFC 6979 technique. Funny thing though, when you do that, you open yourself up to fault attacks. So there's an even more interesting technique we might explore, which allows you to combine both the determinism and the randomness in addition to this random blinding, and mitigate fault attacks as well by adding even more randomness to the signature generation process. All right, feel I'm running a bit over on time, so I'm going to be very quick with Veriform, unfortunately. But Veriform is something we've been developing as part of this Armistice project to create a nice embedded friendly cryptographically verifiable serialization format. So the problem is, even if we have these nice cryptographic implementations, as Adi Shamir said, cryptography isn't penetrated, it's circumvented. So usually the crypto isn't the part that breaks. It's the TLDR of this is things like X509 and ASN1 and all of that. Devices are routinely compromised by failing to parse X509 certificates correctly, failing to validate the signatures. Unfortunately, this sort of process is often instrumental in things like code updates, bootloaders, secure boot processes, that kind of thing. So this paper I have up is a very scary paper about how pretty much nothing besides browsers implements X509 correctly. All these things have like horrible security vulnerabilities. So a quick overview of Veriform. So it provides a canonical encoding using a tag length value structure, which is very common. We've taken ideas from both ASN1, a few of its different encodings, as well as Google protocol buffers. We've done a heapless, no-stid first implementation. This is all we support right now. So this is what we're targeting via Armistice. So it will work out of the box. You don't need a heap. Cool thing that really makes it unique is this concept of structured hashing. So we automatically compute digest for all parts of a message as part of the message decoder. So it's extensible. This is kind of a big important thing in X509 and TLS. So it's capable of supporting unknown fields. In security contexts, you may not want to have fields you don't recognize. So it also supports this idea from X509 of being able to mark certain fields as critical. So if the decoder sees one of these fields, doesn't know what it is, but it has this critical bit, it will fail to parse the message if it's security critical. And finally, it's got these cool proc macro derived encoders and decoders that were inspired by Prost. So here's a really quick syntax example showing the proc macros. If you've ever seen Prost derive, it's very similar to that. So you derive message, you tag each of the fields with these attributes, and it will automatically generate a parser and serializer. Some quick use case examples here. I'm running out of time, unfortunately. But,
yeah, Tony, unfortunately, we've got to go into our next talk here in a second. So are there any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I can wrap it up quickly. So you see there, yeah, this is good for certificates. We're using it for RPC. And finally, for having cryptographically authenticated and signed logs. That's it. Thanks for watching, everyone. And there are some final links, and I will take questions in the chat.